hello, everybody, and welcome to Unlearning Out Loud. We are back from vacation, and we've got stuff to talk about. I'm Mike Lee.
And I'm Melissa Sadorf, and we're so glad that you tuned in so that we can catch you up and talk about some cool things that are happening out in the universe.
For those of you watching on video, it's so close to being exactly, Melissa and I are so close to being exactly framed. I'm trying to line up my shoulder line exactly with hers. And so for those of you watching and think I'm having a seizure, no, I'm not.
You just don't know it.
My life is one long seizure. So great vacations, great time off. Anything, we could do a 2-for-1 here, Melissa.
Sure.
You got anything stuck in your craw or just interesting that you'd like to share about what's been going on with you? And then we'll move on to today's topic, which is about America.
I love it. And
so we're going to jump into that.
Honestly, I've had some downtime. While you were out playing, you and Sue-Ann were playing and having a great time back east, which you should talk a little bit about what you did.
Oh, I will.
I was at home, and for the first time in a while, I had just a stretch of time where I could do stuff or do nothing. It was fabulous. So
I would be hard pressed to even envision you doing nothing. So if you have testimonials that would tell me that
probably
happened,
would. Yeah,
I'll believe it. Yeah, I'll believe that when you believe that I dunked a basketball.
Yeah. Okay. So fair.
Yeah. So Sue-Ann and I went to Boston. We would see a concert. An Australian punk band actually called Amo and the Sniffers. Check them out.
Oh, okay.
Very good band. They played at Fenway. Not the full baseball part, but they have Fenway has a really cool concert venue.
Did not know this.
Concert. I didn't know this either. And it's attached to the baseball stadium. And it's gorgeous. It's wonderful. So shout out to Boston. I love Boston.
Oh.
I love Boston primarily because of the history of it. And it got me thinking a couple of things. First of all the Scottish people were showing up for the World Cup.
I heard that they ran out of beer.
That's not true. I think that might be. I don't know. We might have to unlearn that. We'll see, because I didn't have any trouble getting any while I was there. But maybe after a lot. But the Tartan Army, as they were called, were showing up in groves because their team was playing. Scotland was playing the day we left. So the energy was insane. And by the way, I know my shirt hat is always a topic of conversation.
Yes.
Even though one of my teams I love is the Netherlands. I love a lot of these teams actually. USA, they're my home team, so I'm always rooting for them. But
sure.
And the Netherlands are playing the day, and I really was going to wear that, and I thought, nope, got to wear my USA jersey because what we're going to talk about today. My trip to Boston got me thinking, we do the Freedom Trail, I just love history, period, and story. And so Boston is one of the most history-rich cities in the United States. You can make a case that maybe it is the most history-rich city, but just a dynamic, very interesting place for lots of different reasons. And so I got to thinking, we should spend some time talking about American history, and I don't know if you've heard, but it's also the 250th anniversary of the
semi-cinquentennial.
Yeah, why do we have to say words like that?
Because it's cool that I can say it.
It's cool that you can say it. When you ask me to say it, I'm going to take a drink of tea.
Fair point.
Show off. And so I don't even know what that means, but it's funny because I do remember the 1976 celebration?
Oh, yeah. The semi-quintennial.
So here's my Larry David moment, though.
Semi-quintennial?
Is it really such a big deal, 250? I mean, why is 250 so much more important than 249 or 251?
Because it's a nice round number. I don't know.
Yep. But that doesn't make it inherently better. That just means we like saying 250 because it sounds cool, right? Yeah, I mean, I think you can make a pretty good case that 251 is far more special than 250 because it's another year doing it. It's just a little pet peeve I've always had about.
This is stuck in your craw.
It's stuck in my craw. It's an artificial creation of humans that we just have to round numbers up and call that one special. And, your 30th birthday is more important than your 29th. And it's not. It's really not. It's just, anyway. So, the suns, we flew by 30 times versus 31 times. It is what it is. And speaking of, last thing, and then we'll get into the topic. Larry David has a new show on HBO.
No, really?
He does. And it's directly aligned with this. Did you know he was a history major?
No, I did not know that.
In history. He loves history. So he has a whole show now that's basically sketch comedy, 3 or 4 sketches where he inserts himself into famous historical moments.
Oh my gosh.
And it is, there's one episode out, it's a scream. The first one is he's at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, trying to make a case that they should have like 25 other things in there that people aren't allowed to do in this country. And, you know, you should be in here that you can't share an umbrella. If you don't want to get wet, bring your own damn umbrella. And Jefferson's arguing with him, Franklin's arguing with him, you know, that this does not belong in this document. Why do you want to live in a country where everybody just shares umbrellas? And it's pretty funny. And then the one that I laughed the hardest at was they talk about Rosa Parks. There's a little history lesson at the front end, it's small, but then they say like the Rosa Parks thing. They talk about, but what people don't know is she had tried this once before. And so they actually cut to a scene on the bus in the 50s, and she's sitting and I'm not moving. Well, then the camera moves over and you see she's sitting next to Larry David dressed as some, old Jewish gentleman. And it turns out that she's on this bus and he just keeps talking to her. And he stands up for her not to have to move. But then he starts going on and on about all the stuff that Larry David goes on and on. And eventually she gets so sick of him, she crawls over a seat and goes to the back of the bus so she can hang out with some of the fun people playing cards, and decides to try it again. Like, she's like, I can't do it. So she actually chooses to go to the back of the bus on the first attempt.
That's funny.
So pretty funny stuff. Anyway, I highly recommend it, and it directly aligns. So let's talk about the United States of America.
Let's do it.
Clean and simple, right?
Sure. Really plain and not so simple.
Yeah. So everyone who listens or watches the show knows that we love to get into why does this stuff happen? Like, we know certain things factually, and what is it about human nature that makes it more complicated than it already is? Yeah. And there isn't anything more complicated than our history, or any country's history for that matter. If you study any country, they're all complicated, right? So we want to talk a little bit about, some things that are going on when we think about our past. And for those of you who have a political persuasion and you're looking for, here we go, we're going to start slamming America. The guy in the USA jersey, by the way, we're going to start slamming America, or the other way around, right? That we're going to whitewash things, or that's not what we're here to do today at all. Actually, the ball will be in your court every single time. Not your court, Melissa, but everyone who's listening.
Proverbial you.
Yeah. And so we're going to talk about, if we know certain things happen, it's up to us then to process that, go through the curiosity phase, figure out what it means, if anything, and whether or not it changes anything we think about the country. It might even reinforce it in a positive way. It might go, it might leave you confused. And guess what? That's okay. You can be totally confused about something that happened, but still think you live in the greatest country in the world. Right. And the one thing we will advocate for that isn't in your court is it should be okay to talk about it if we know that it's true.
Good point.
Right. Or it's okay to talk about something that we're trying to find out if it's true. Right. And so I don't think anybody could make a valid argument that a founding father, and I know they're not this monolith, right? Like, there's different people with but that some of the ones that we think of the most weren't passionate about the fact that we should talk about this stuff, that we should debate it, that we should be curious enough to not accept everything at face value, right? And really dig. So we're going to be operating today on things that come from what are referred to as basically first source, original source material. And I know that, Melissa, I know you're highly familiar with what source material or original source is, because of our big Common Core phase while we were all still in the classroom. So just for people that aren't historians or educators, do you want to just tell people what is an original source and what's the difference between that and something else?
Sure. Well, an original source is something that somebody that lived the experience wrote down, and we have it as a document, an artifact that we can refer back to. And a secondary source is something that somebody heard about it and wrote it down. Mm-hmm. So that's a really simple way of distinguishing between the two.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. And it doesn't mean that just because something's a first source doesn't mean it's automatically true either. I study a lot of English history. There is so much that historians will say, this was written by this person. However, this person was also part of the Catholic faction who was trying to paint Queen Elizabeth as, you know, whatever. And so take it with a grain of salt or put it in the pile to digest later, right? We just know that if the further you get away from an original source, the more questionable it can become, right? So these are just how historians operate. And we can't step away from that just because it makes us uncomfortable, right? Let's go to the original source. Let's not let some guy on TV tell us what Thomas Jefferson really meant. Well, what did Thomas Jefferson actually say? Right. And even somebody might say, well, the guy on TV said Thomas Jefferson felt this way and he quoted him. Yeah, but Thomas Jefferson was also a complicated human being. Have you ever changed your opinion? Have you ever grappled with something and wondered out loud about something in your writings or your personal journals? Of course you have. Right. So allowing people to filter and cherry pick for you. And I know people say, well, I don't have time for that. Well, the other assertion I would have is what's more patriotic, right? Taking the time to find out on a position or even just deferring. I don't know what to think about that because I haven't done I haven't had the time to do that. I've got a family, I've got kids, but I'm not going to just jump in with the herd, right? All my friends and the people who believe in the other stuff I believe and say, this is what Jefferson meant, right? Just because that's what they're saying, because that's a shortcut, right? Yeah. That's not a patriotic step. A patriotic step is being truly informed, being curious, and being interested in the country you live in enough
and engaged.
Yeah. So there's some things going on when we talk about our history. The first one is cognitive dissonance, right? Everybody knows what that is, I think, right? This idea that you've got two conflicting things and the brain is trying to like X and Y, and I really would prefer it just to be X and not Y, or not a little X and a little Y, or maybe there's a whole bunch of other letters in between that might be at play here. That cognitive dissonance is when you're holding competing ideas, right, in the same space. And we talked about the brain is an energy conserver. It hates that. It takes effort, right? So when a primary source evidence contradicts like cherished foundational understandings of who we think we are, right? Like my country's origins are flawless, or this person was a hero, or this person, right? It's painful for the brain, literally painful. And so to escape it, we get away of all the context. We strip away any inconvenient evidence. We ignore that, right? And we say that, like I heard some, jackass on a podcast say this about Thomas Jefferson, but you know what? I think he's just some, liberal spinner, right? Trying to badmouth the country. That is that shortcut that your brain is taking to get out of, instead of saying, person might be liberal, they might be conservative, they might be ignorant, they might be informed. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. I'm not going to dismiss it right away. Yeah. Right. So, the other thing about it is this idea of cognitive ease and cognitive strain, which is basically the brain, again, likes things that are easy. Right. So like raw history introduces all of these contradictions, but kind of like, these kind of like simple fables or fairy tales are super simple, right? I can grasp this concept just like I can grasp the concept of the big bad wolf, right? From when I was 3 in the fairy tale, right? The other thing that's at play here is tribal binding, and kind of like these ideas of sacred myths. And it's this thing that, all societies, not America, all societies, they kind of cohere around these like shared moral narratives, right? These, it's not about, if you fact check these fables or these myths, it's a threat to the tribe, right? So all the people who believe like you believe, if you go into a room full of them and you come out and say, you know what? I'm just reading this first original source document about Christopher Columbus, and if the thought of saying that in a group of 100 people that share your opinions kind of makes you cringe because you know what's coming, that's an example of what we're talking about. It's a threat to the tribe. Like we have this shared belief. And then people will do this idea of like explanatory, like I have this deep understanding about America's history or English history or whatever, you name it. And I'm going to cling to it. I'm going to tell you that I've got a hold of it. I'm going to argue with you to the point that I'm going to, like ruin Thanksgiving dinner because I so fundamentally understand this topic. But if you really ask the person to kind of lay out sequence of events or cite citations or understand, like nobody walks around with citations, don't get me wrong, but if you ask them to really dive into the thing the tower they're standing on, it collapses because they don't know. They might be right, they might be wrong, right? And so so these are all things that are going on kind of the psychology, social psychology, cognitive dissonance side. And I would encourage people to look these up. And I know we have fun talking about all of this stuff, but if you have a chance to look up, hey, how does the brain deal with cognitive dissonance? How does it try to make things simple, and how does it do it? Don't let me be the one sitting here. I'm just trying to, Melissa and I are just trying to introduce these concepts, and hopefully that they stimulate your own curiosity, right? To dig a little bit deeper. So Melissa,
I think it's good framing for the kinds of things that we're going to talk about, because we do have some mythology around our founding fathers and the birth of a nation and the things that went into that being possible and where we are today, because we do have these narratives that we tell ourselves every 4th of July or every Columbus Day or every, President's Day. And they might be fun and they might be good fodder for primary activities and art projects. But really being able to do the digging and understand people are not two-dimensional characters. There's depth, and not honoring the depth that a person brings to the equation is really, as you said, seems to me to be pretty un-American, because we question everything, and we should.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes good things come from different intentions. Like there's so many interesting stories about people that were pursuing one thing and they stumbled into being a part of something else and ended up becoming very important. And so we're going to have a little fun today with some kind of quick hit stuff around the birth of the United States. And then we've got a few deeper topics too. And as we got into the content for this, we realized there is so much that we can talk about that this is going to be a multi-parter. So I hope you like today's episode, because you're going to get 2 more probably. So, because it's a lot, and it's kind of fun. So let's jump into, let's do a couple of quick hitters, right? Okay. What do you say?
Yeah, let's.
So, quick hit. This will be super fast. George Washington's wooden teeth. Were they wooden?
Honestly, when you brought this one up, I was just really kind of grossed out. So I really was. You know that in the 1700s, medical science was not where it is now. And so you think that you know how things operated, but really you don't. So no, I had no idea about this. I mean, I heard about the wooden teeth and, but no. Yeah.
So yes, they were kind of gross if you don't like hippopotamus ivory in your mouth. It was just, there was just all kinds of stuff going on in George's mouth. Hippopotamus ivory, some gold, other human teeth.
Disgusting.
Yeah. And here's an example though of where even the simplest fact can become complicated. And one of the things as I was preparing for this show, and this is what I'd really like to red flag for people. As I was Googling, cross-referencing, blah, 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 and Google's gotten big on putting their AI front and center on the search.
Yep.
I'm going to tell you, it provided tons of misinformation.
So fascinating.
Fabricated I'm always asking for original sources. Every time I can it made stuff up.
It made up original sources?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I had, luckily I'm going back and checking what it's giving me, and come to find out it's a train wreck. Now keep in mind, AI is built on human knowledge already, right? So if there's a lot of misinformation out there about something, it's something that's going to turn up, right? Yeah. So you got to really do due diligence. But there is an example, like Gemini tried to tell me, like that we know for a fact that he took the teeth of freed slaves, that gave him his teeth, blah, blah. And it actually made up a ledger quote that wasn't exactly right, that, or an advertisement where he was asking for it. But if you actually look at the original sources, it's slightly different, but it changes the entire meaning. So the reality is we don't know for sure, right? So if you want to, it's complicated, but we do know they weren't wooden, right? So that's pretty cool. Here's another one that everybody knows of. What is it everybody thinks that Paul Revere yelled as he rode his horse through the
British are coming. The British are coming. The British are coming.
Yeah. So I'm calling BS, because we know that's not true. right? Yeah. First of all, if Paul Revere had ridden his horse through the other side of the harbor there up into Concord, yelling, "The British are coming," it would have confused people because they would have thought it meant them.
That's true.
Because the people of the colony considered themselves British citizens. So they did not go through. He did not go through and do all that. And the idea that he was the lone, right? It's been kind of sold as this hero story because we need these hero myths. People love these stories. It gives us a national identity, and it's something to kind of rally around, right? So really, Revere did do an amazing ride. He did some incredible things, and we all know the expression one if by land,
two if by sea.
Yeah. So, and that part's true, right? The idea that if there's two lights, that means the British are coming by sea. They're going to take the harbor, versus the one lantern meant they were going to take the long way around. And so it just had a lot of importance. But he was dispatched to Lexington because Sam Adams and I think it was John Hancock. I hope that's right. He was either Hancock or Patrick Henry, but I think it was John Hancock. He was trying to warn because the British were going to probably come and arrest them. And so he did do his job. He got there. He warned them of this. But one thing that doesn't get talked about because it's not quite as sexy is he was caught by the British afterwards and arrested. And we have first source stuff, right? We have his actual sworn deposition about the capture. And so it's just really interesting because I don't remember ever hearing that, so.
Me either. That he was hit on the head by one of the soldiers that arrested him and knocked him on the head with his pistol.
Yeah. So so it's a great story, but the real story is actually more interesting if you dive into it than the superficial story that we were kind of given because it was clean. It was a fairy tale. Not a total fairy tale rooted in truth, right? But a kind of a historical fiction or a polished kind of, So some of the changes that were made, they're not about making someone look bad, right? Or good. It's just this makes for a better story, and it happens throughout history. America, England, France, you name it. It happens everywhere, right? So hey, what is the most famous massacre in American history?
Well, I think there's a couple that I could name, but
one that's actually named massacre.
The Boston Massacre.
There you go. Because I should have been clear about that because you could make a case that, 9/11 and all the rest of it. But so what's really interesting about the Boston Massacre is it's not at all how it was portrayed. And basically then we have court testimony of this. So here's some things about the Boston Massacre. We'll go quickly. It's not controversial. It's factual. So these soldiers were standing guard. There had been ongoing kind of like mini riots of Boston citizens taunting and things they still do at Celtics games and Patriot games. And they were throwing snowballs and oyster shells and rocks at these soldiers. And it was a bit of a mess at the time, right? And so basically, at some point, right, the accusation was that the man in charge of the troops yelled fire and ordered them to fire. And one of the most interesting things is the lithograph that we've all seen, right? We've all seen the lithograph of what it looked like with this idea of soldiers lined up just shooting in city streets, but it doesn't depict, and it was done deliberately. That was a piece of propaganda. The Sons of Liberty were trying to get something done, and so they saw an opportunity here. And it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Sam Adams that commissioned the lithograph. I hope I'm right on that. And it was very much portrayed as these innocent people, these children were just gunned down the street, and the order was given by the British soldiers. But what came out in the trial was that, yes, the British soldiers did, and it's terrible. Some people died in the streets in Boston, but they were they were basically under assault. And they never could make the case that the man in charge of the troops had actually ordered them to fire. It was a bit of chaos. At some point, there were reports that there was fire in the area. So someone had screamed fire, and there was that going on. There was also no one knows. One guy fell to the ground and the gun went off concurrently. It just was that recipe for disaster, right? Just chaos,
mob mentality at work,
just waiting to happen, right? Scared, or angry. We don't know. I don't know these British soldiers, but I do know that something horrible happened, and it was terrible, and it was used as a way to push sentiment right further against the British. And so it's really fascinating. Do you know who defended the British soldiers at this trial?
I do not.
John Adams. Yes, that John Adams.
That's so John Adams, interesting. Because I did not know that.
Yeah, John Adams, and people were very mad at him. Some of the Sons of Liberty were not happy with him for defending these soldiers in court. But Adams' assertion was, we're a nation of laws, not mobs. And the law will decide whether these men were guilty, not mob rule, right? Not the law will decide. And if it means that I'm defending them, and was also an attempt to show England and other countries that because there were, the stories were really coming out in Boston. This city is being run by mobs. It's a mob rule city. And so it was also a bit calculated in the idea, hey, this is a chance to show that we are not ruled by mobs, that we are very much able to govern and
that was New York and all of the gangs.
And in the 70s. Warriors come out and play. And so he successfully defended them. There were some manslaughter charges. There was some, but the hardcore charges that were levied against leveled against these soldiers did not hold up.
Very
interesting. Because of John Adams' defense. And I will put a plug in. If you've never seen the HBO miniseries with Paul Giamatti, John Adams, I highly recommend it. It's really pretty historically accurate. And they do one of the episodes of the miniseries is this piece. And a matter of fact, this is what got me interested in this piece. Is I watched that and I thought that can't be true. And so I went back and researched it and found out how much of it was true. They consolidate, they make some care. I mean, you do some things for dramatic license, but the crux of it was accurate. So, Melissa, I know you've got one.
Yeah.
1776, July 4th was the signing of the Declaration of Independence, right?
Of course, we all know that, right? Because that's what we celebrate Independence Day on. And it was the signing of the Declaration, which if you've never seen it is, it's actually kind of underwhelming, but it's kind of cool.
It's worn out. Yeah. It's worn out.
It's pretty worn out.
Yeah.
Very cool. I highly recommend, 10 out of 10. But it wasn't really signed until August 2nd, 1776. And there were people that were not there at the delegation and added their names, their signatures, weeks or even months later. So there wasn't, even though we have a really nice, you talk about art, and the signing of the Declaration is one of those iconic, classic art pieces around the independence of America. No single signing dramatic scene that picture represents. So,
very interesting. And some people are, again, historians are still always digging on stuff. There's stuff to be found. There's still original records hiding in archives places that historians are looking through all the time. The stuff they continue to unearth here and in Europe, and it's amazing to me that can still settle some of these things. But one of the things that they think is Jefferson recalled signing on July 4th. But some of the historians seem to think that he was conflating the adoption date and the signing ceremony and kind of putting them into different things. So really, really interesting. What about this whole, we were all taught about the Indians and the Tea Party.
Boston Tea Party, yes, where you just were.
Yeah, I was in that very harbor. And so, and a lot of it was that they were trying to trick the British into thinking it was the Indians. Is that true?
Well, the point of Indian disguise was not to fool anyone in blaming Native Americans, because no one really believed that that's what happened. The costumes really did serve a double purpose. It was a symbolic claim to an American identity. So they took a non-British approach to showing up for this event, and really also making sure that they had an alibi, so to speak, where they were plausible deniability. If they showed up as a Native American, they couldn't be later charged with being there. So
the face detection cameras couldn't figure out who it was. And so, and again, it's close to the true story, right? Yeah. But it's not. And, one of the things that's important, and this is actually going to be a point later, but I really want to mention it, is, I think we're going to get there. So let me not get ahead of myself. And we have 8 deeper topics that we were hoping we could get to. That is clearly not going to happen, but at least in this episode. But we're going to hit a couple. And the only one of them is non-Revolutionary War, birth of America. And that is starting with really, and I don't understand why this is controversial, but you can make a pretty good case that talking about Christopher Columbus is one of the most controversial characters out there, right? So basically, he's gotten grabbed as a culture war issue, right? And so he's become either this cartoon monster or this flawless hero that deserves endless praise and statues on every corner. And the reality is the source documents and the written history that are available don't support either one of those caricatures, right? Now, let me be clear. It's not up to me to tell you how to feel about Christopher Columbus. But it is up for me to tell you, I think I just butchered that. Here's what we know about him. You decide. And what I find is when people find out some of the actual facts, they realize that it's more complicated than they think. And the idea that they just bundle themselves into a binary, he was a hero or he was a monster, strictly a monster, is so flattening and so simplifying. It doesn't do justice to this country. And to talk about that and to talk out loud about what recognition does he deserve and what, this is hairy stuff, right? Anytime you talk about recognizing heroes and whether they get statues or whether they get a day, right? That is hairy. And the fact that we have such a hard time talking about it without dragging it into culture land territory is really telling. And it's really why we have a hard time getting somewhere. So Christopher Columbus was, first of all, we know, and I don't know anybody that argues that he did not discover America. We know that's true. We have records that is not true, right? That and people who want to claim that's a culture war argument against, white America or something, it's nonsense because we're actually talking about the Norse people, right? That Nordic people coming here in 1000 AD, right? And we all know that's 492 years before Christopher Columbus made it, right? And we also know that obviously there were indigenous people here.
Right.
They've been here for a long time. Right. So if you want to talk about, let's change what we say about him and say that, that he didn't discover, America for Imperial Europe, but he did because it had already been discovered by other people, but he did discover it for Imperial Europe. Right? Maybe Spain didn't know much about it or whatever, right? We can have that conversation, but to just blatantly say, nope, because it's part of who we are and it's part of our mythology. He discovered America and I'm sticking to it because that's what I was taught when I was a kid.
And we have a holiday, so it has to be true.
Right. And I'm not, and it's just blatant. And here's where we've talked about before about emotional triggers, right? Some people, if you say what I just said in front of them, if you ask them, monitor yourself, take your blood pressure, you're going to elevate and you're going to want to push back in spite of the fact you will not push back that is factually correct. Right. So what you're saying to me is that because it's so important to my mythology about this country, I am willing to ignore fact. Right. That is really telling. Right. But it's also not accurate to just say he was this demon sent straight from hell, right? Just this cartoon monster who never did anything right. There's things about Christopher Columbus that are fascinating, right? He was a genius.
And tell me what ways he was a genius.
Well, I mean, first of all, his ability, his navigational abilities as what he did, his ability to do what he did was not for the faint of heart, right? It was you had to have pretty incredible bravery. You had to be pretty driven. You had to have a lot of leadership skills. And we have some really interesting eyewitness accounts that are in biography. Even one of them is actually by his son. So of course, take it with a grain of salt. Maybe it's but telling about how he had this really incredible knowledge about the almanacs and the moon and the sun. And obviously, you had for navigational purposes, and that he at one point, as a bargaining chip, he basically threatened some of the indigenous people that if they didn't do it a certain way, that God was going to take the moon away. But he had consulted an almanac and knew that there was an eclipse coming. And so he leveraged his knowledge, right, for a bargaining chip. And just like any human being, even the most horrible, horrific people that did some of the most horrible, horrific things, right, there are moments of grace and decency, and it doesn't make the horrible things they did any better. Matter of fact, his brutality is well documented, to the point that he was arrested and dragged back to Spain for some of the brutal things that he was doing, right? So if you want to have a holiday for Columbus, that's fine. If you want to have statues for Columbus, that's up to you to decide or argue or debate. But you have to recognize that you are arguing to have a person who has this record of things that they've done, for better or for worse, and be able to rationalize why that person should have a statue over this person, right? And just because it's the way we've always done it isn't really historically accurate. It's not in service to the country, right? To embrace something that we know to be a fiction, and to ignore it. It's not some liberal attack on Christopher Columbus. To go to the source material and find out that he was arrested by Spain and taken back for trial because he did do horrible things, right? Yeah. So again, it's up for the populace to have that debate, but have it on informed ground, not on this ideology and mythology, right? So pretty interesting, huh?
Like, that is very interesting.
Stuff in school, right? Maybe some of the problem is we introduced some of the stuff way too early. I'm just thinking of this out, but think about it. When did we start learning about this stuff? Like first grade. And you sure can't talk about who Christopher Columbus really was in first grade.
No, you can't.
For better or worse. So you just focus on little cute songs about the ships and, all that kind of stuff. And so, I don't know, maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe we get ourselves into this kind of stuff. So, hey, I know you were talking about something about, that everybody thinks that the first civil, or you were going to want to bring up this idea that have we had more than one civil war already?
Yeah. When we think about the Civil War, we think about Abraham Lincoln and North versus South and, all of the things around slavery. But really, if you think about it, the revolution, because to your point earlier, those people thought of themselves as British. So the British are coming wouldn't have played because they thought of themselves as British. So the Revolutionary War was really, I believe, the first Civil War. And it was vicious. You had, just like we talk about in the Civil War that we typically think of, neighbors that were against neighbors, families that were ripped apart, neighbors that were dispossessed, torture. And
don't forget tarred and feathered.
Tarred and feathered, yeah, that's an awful way to die.
People think of that as cute, but it was a horribly painful thing to experience.
Yeah. It would kill you.
You're spot on. There's you could make a good case. Now, I understand why it's not officially called a civil war because it wasn't a country technically, but theoretically or conceptually, it really was a civil war. And what we've actually, and this is something that people don't really know, is that, or if they've heard it, they've heard an oversimplified version, is a lot of people just think it was all these American colonists who wanted to break free of England and we're done. But really, and then what some people who dove in a little bit more have learned that it really was like a third, a third, and a third. It was a third loyalists, these conservative loyalists to the English crown, a third who were indifferent, and a third that were rebels. But if you peel back the layers even a little bit more, that is not exactly right. The actual feeling, what historians believe now is that the split is really oversimplified. It wasn't a third and a third and a third, but it really was about 15 to 20% ish on the extremes, right? Mm. But most colonists were uncommitted. No, they were in the middle, and they didn't really take a side. So what you really had was this small percentage of people driving this movement and leveraging things like the Boston Massacre to do it, right? And so it's not this idea that, America just had this yearning for freedom and Americans and blah, blah, blah. And there were some, but there were plenty that either were happy being British citizens and wanted to stay that way, or ones who just said, I'm just trying to get by.
Yeah.
You guys
don't care either way. You tell me when you figured it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Which kind of in some ways echoes our modern politics.
It absolutely does.
Large group of uncommitted, unengaged people. And so, and we have lots of first source material of people talking about, how many people were taking sides on certain things. And actually the 1/3 simplification comes from a misreading of an original letter from John Adams, who was actually talking about the French Revolution. So it's really, really, really interesting stuff. So speaking of John Adams, and I hit on this, and we can get through a couple of these a little bit faster, but I do want to just kind of tie that one up, is that that John Adams was big on this idea of the rule of law. And that to him, that was the most important thing. And he shifted and had a foot here and a foot there. And he really was, he's a really interesting character, really interesting person to study, a person who has some really amazing thoughts, complicated thoughts, who kind of ran the gamut. And I find the trial and the fact that he was responsible for the acquittal of these men, of the captain in particular, not all of them. Again, there were some manslaughter charges. And you know what happened to the manslaughter charge people?
No.
By the way?
What?
So what they did is they actually got a reduced sentence. And the reduced sentence was not execution. It was they had their thumb branded. They had to have a branded for that they had committed manslaughter. So if something ever happened again, 2 manslaughters, manslaughter once is an accident. Manslaughter twice, that's murder. I made that up. I'm sure.
I'm sure that would fly a day in court somewhere.
Yeah, look, I've done it before, right? So it's really interesting. And then some people will debate, what was Adams' motivation? Why did he get involved in this? Was he just trying to make a name for himself because he was trying to grow his practice? And there's a lot to chew on. And in the end, again, a complicated man who helped really push a nation forward. But sometimes not as strategically or clearly as we kind of thought of it. But you had something on King George.
Yeah.
Because I know let me just tell you my impression of King George, especially because we all watched Schoolhouse Rock, remember? And it was like King George, just like this
the big mouth. I mean, he was like a big mouth coming across the ocean, just kind of.
Yeah. It was shot heard around the world.
There you go.
It was the start of the revolution.
Oh, wow, you're good.
Ready on the move. Get your rifle, get your gun, report to General Washington. Hurry, men, there's not an hour to lose. I don't know where that just came from. I'm very impressed.
I can do conjunction junction. What's your function?
We'll save that for a grammar episode.
There you go.
So we had this cartoon image of King George, but that's not the real story, is it?
No, he was absolutely cast as a tyrant. And again, that propaganda machine that you're talking about, that was a part of the Revolutionary War. But in reality, he really was a pretty limited monarch. He wasn't the one that set taxes. Colonial tax laws really originated with Parliament, not by royal decree. So the whole concept that he was the one that was out to get the colonists was just not true. Was not true at all. It was Parliament.
And there were times that he was obviously, he would. There's all kinds of interesting stuff about King George, and the ups and the downs, and we're not here to say that King George was Mother Teresa. But what we are saying is the image that was presented of him and of Britain in general, right? It really, we were kind of sold this idea that, the red coats were the bad guys and the blue coats were the good guys. And it really is that simple, right? And it's not. I mean, luckily for us, I'm happy that it worked out for the blue coats. But England was a very complicated nation that had a lot going on. They had their own wars in Europe to deal with. They were broke quite often. The reason they kept getting into these tussles with the colonies in the first place was because they were trying to extract enough money to keep the coffers, because they were, just going through it. And so they had been at war essentially on and off for hundreds and hundreds of years, and war ain't cheap, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't, their big focus was they weren't all sitting around thinking about America all the time, right? Their bigger concerns were typically France and Spain and the Protestant Catholic fights and all the rest of it. There was a lot happening. We were just one of many things that were going on, just kind of pain in the butt upstart that was giving us trouble. And there are some characters that, if you dive in, some generals in particular, the man that was put in charge of running Boston, the military commander, could be a real difficult individual. And there are also stories about American soldiers that were, interesting and very difficult. And so in some of our future episodes, we are going to be able to talk about some of our national heroes, the George Washingtons, the Ben Franklins, and we're going to have some conversations about that as well. Speaking of Ben Franklin.
Yes.
This is coming out of left field for you, okay. I know.
Bring it on.
But true or false, we're gonna do this one later, so I don't want to give it away.
Okay.
Did Benjamin Franklin suggest? Do you think Benjamin Franklin suggested the turkey as the national bird, like we've all heard?
I'm going to have to think about that.
I probably wouldn't be asking you this if it was true.
You're going to tell me that it didn't happen. Otherwise, you'd be asking me to think about it. So, but
we'll come back to it.
Okay.
We'll come back to it. That's a little hook for later.
All right.
I just think it's really interesting. But then the last thing, let's talk a little bit about for today. There's so much more, because if we didn't talk about your favorite American Revolution, American history
I have a couple.
topic, don't sweat it, right? So we've got. I know you wanted to say something about France.
No, you say something about France.
You want me to say okay, because we love talking about France. Any place that makes wine that good, let's talk about it.
And cheese.
And France's relationship with the world is fascinating if you dig into their history. Their relationship with England, it is hyper political. The strategy, the role of religion in this, it's just fascinating. And we really, again, we're just an offshoot of all this. But the reality is France and England didn't get along. Right, we know that. They hadn't gotten along forever. And really, anything that could be a pain in England's ass was
good for France.
Yeah, and England did the same thing with France for years as well, right? Like anything that could kind of, give them difficulty, they might have been okay with. So the reality is that, we have this image that, America was this rough upstart bunch of John Waynes that grabbed their guns and they stood up to the most powerful army in the world and drove them off. It's partially true.
Yeah, rebel tactics, those guerrilla tactics were new.
Yeah, absolutely partially true. And a lot of very brave people went and did a lot of very brave things. But again, that's a bit of a flattened history. The reality is that, and again, we can understand why this doesn't fit our national mythology. To say that the reality is, for example, without France, this war is there aren't many. You won't find a historian that doesn't tell you the United States likely doesn't win this war without foreign intervention or foreign support, right? And the United States was fishing for support from Spain, all the usual suspects of the English, the enemies of the English, right? So there was Spain and France and anything, but the French money and French munitions, and one of the biggest things that happened in the Revolutionary War was the French Navy sailing in and sealing off the Chesapeake at Yorktown. And the reality is, without the French, it likely collapses, right? And so I know some people, because it became popular within the last 25, 30 years, or especially since World War II, to like French bash, which normally would sound like a great party to go to,
no
French
kidding.
bash. But it became really trendy and kind of like herd mentality to like bash France. And, if it wasn't for us, there wouldn't be a France and blah, 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 and, which is all fun. And they got run over by, Germany and all the rest of it. Yeah. Like I understand where all that comes from, but it's complicated. And what we do know for sure is that in the late 1700s, without France, there likely is no United States of America. And there is no, at least not then. Right. Yep. And we don't know how it would have played out. Maybe later Spain gets involved more. Maybe other countries get involved. Maybe we're celebrating our 250th anniversary or birthday, because I can't say the big phrase you said earlier. We're celebrating it 30 years from today. Right. Or from now. Right. We don't know how it would have played out. But what we do know is the version of the United States that we know now doesn't exist without the French support. And again, lots of original source stories about this, documentation about what was done. No one was trying to hide it. But over time, right, we kind of took all the glory, gave some like honorable glory to Lafayette. Everybody knows Lafayette, right? So it kind of makes it sound like, oh, it's just this one guy that kind of helped us.
Or
right? Like,
you can't leave out Rochambeau.
mm-hmm.
Can't leave out General Rochambeau just because his name is amazing.
Right, Rochambeau.
Rochambeau, you. Yep.
Yeah, and so obviously we got a couple of these characters that it was concentrated on, but the reality is without the French government and without the American, and this is where flattened hurts, right? It actually does damage to the American story, the mythology of America, because French didn't just jump in because they wanted to. It took years of relationship building, including by Benjamin Franklin, right? Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin.
Who lived there for years.
Yeah, they spent years building up relationships that were eventually able to be leveraged into some sort of credibility with France. So it's not that France is, this angelic thing sent straight from heaven to support the blossoming American United States. It was the result of a lot of hard work and a lot of hard diplomacy, and diplomacy is hard work. So to just say, well, we did it and we did it on our own, really flattens out the complexity of the work that was done to make the country. And so what I'm really hoping we get from this as we wrap this episode is, and we prep for the next one, is that, is that we kind of stop and ask ourselves, is it okay to say, or is it okay for a person to say, I think we live in the greatest country in the world, and I think we had the most amazing form of government that has ever been put forward. I think that, blah, blah, blah. Can we say all these things, yet say that maybe the stories that we've been told aren't accurate, and I'm interested in the truth about my country, and I can still, because so many things have happened, I can find out that the Boston Massacre wasn't exactly as portrayed, right? I can find out, and it's okay to accept that and still say, and think about that. All these complicated people, and this is what came from it. How cool is that?
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that more valuable and more honoring of our country than a children's story that we tell ourselves and we clutch to? And the worst part is that we're so committed to something that isn't even true that we're willing to really erode the very country that we supposedly love so much because I'm going to fight you over whether something was a fact or not, right? Yeah. Like, I'm not willing to accept that maybe Christopher Columbus didn't actually discover America, and it's so important to me that I'm going to destroy relationships and help divide this country over it, right? And it's important for the other side of these debates to understand that these myths, this mythology, and I don't like using the word necessarily myth because it sounds like it's just like it's all totally made up, but the mythology in that way that I'm using that word, right? This narrative about America, that it's important that when we want to have difficult conversations about Christopher Columbus or about that, we understand that we're really hitting at something that's important to people. That's part of what they consider to be their core, right? And so to recklessly go in without acknowledging why this, understanding who you're talking to, having the empathy, saying like, this means something to this national identity, this means something. And I'm hell-bent on getting people to understand that maybe we need to talk about Christopher Columbus, but I'm going to do it in a way that actually will move the football by being empathetic about the people I'm dealing with, understanding where it's coming from, and understanding that national mythologies are important in countries, and if you're going to reshape them, that's delicate work, right? You don't just take a hammer to it, because all you're going to get is pushback, and you're not moving the football. And actually what you end up with is where we in some ways are now, which is whiplash.
Right.
Like, in fact, I'm going to push back so hard on what you've asserted that I'm going to go like totally in the other direction. And now you've actually lost ground. So being committed to having difficult conversations about very complicated people, but doing it in a way that's respectful and honoring of the fact that there is a country in the world that doesn't have a national mythology. And it's important to those people that live there. Well, and we need to table with that.
And, we often talk about how if you don't learn your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And yet, if we have such a two-dimensional version of history, we're not doing ourselves any favors by dealing with the complexity of the times that we're in and imagining a yesterday that was idealized to the point where it just didn't even exist.
Yeah.
So you cannot bring that learning forward.
And we need to put these, we need to, I think, reframe how we we've got to try to get away from this good and bad binary box, right? That's what gets us in trouble. And for example, we've talked about, Christopher Columbus was complicated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we could have this conversation about almost everyone.
George
right?
Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams.
And I have a feeling that some of the people that would want to defend Christopher Columbus would be just fine with acknowledging the fact that Martin Luther King, cheated on his wife.
Yeah.
Right? He was a great civil rights leader, but also a philanderer, right?
Right.
And it's up to you to decide by your personal moral compass whether you want to think of that person as good or bad. I think it's easier to think about it as like, I didn't know them. All I know is what I've been told about them. But what I do know is that, for example, Martin Luther King had amazing work in the field of civil rights, and that he did some wonderful things.
And was a great orator.
And was a great speaker. I also know that he was a human being who did some stupid stuff, right? I know that Christopher Columbus was incredibly brave. I know that he, did this, that, and the other thing. He was super smart by most accounts, but I also know he had a brutal side. He looked at, the indigenous people as far lesser, right? Like, and then I can have more conversations about, well, how common was that in those days? And was that pretty much like, and you see the beauty of the founding fathers is if you read some of their own self-reckonings, their own journals, they grapple with this just in themselves, this path of, I'm a slave owner, but I just got done signing something about all men being created equal. What does that mean about me? What does that mean? I think it was Thomas Jefferson has a great quote about, I worry about slavery, our country and slavery, that eventually God is going to judge us pretty harshly. I'm summarizing what he said, but basically, but he didn't do enough.
No, he had children with his slave, Sally Henning.
Yeah, Hennings. Yeah. And he didn't do enough. Did he do some? Yeah. Was he better than some? Yeah. So does that make him good or bad? I'd say that makes him human.
Sure.
But I will say he's a complicated human that did some things that he could have done a heck of a lot better, but was also integral in the forming of a nation, and was a man that if you just say Thomas Jefferson thought this, you also have to say, well, when? Mm-hmm. Because in 1768, Thomas Jefferson had a completely different opinion on things than he did in 1800, because guess what? He was curious and he thought about
learning.
Things.
Yeah.
And he kept learning, and that's what
unlearning, as the case.
Unlearning. And I wish that, if there's one takeaway is what the founding fathers, want. We can argue till the cows come home about, things that are in the Constitution or not in the Constitution. One thing I think we could all agree on is that they wanted us to stay curious. And it's the tendency that they modeled, and they would say nothing is off limits to talk about, because they did it. Right. Yep. So we're going to wrap the show. We are really loving this topic. We know there's a lot more to talk about, and the other shows we're going to get into some more of the really famous, some of the very famous things that you think about American history. And some of them are pretty fun. Some of them are more serious, just like today. But they'll all be, I promise you, very interesting. So as we go into this World Cup, the United States plays on Wednesday night. I hope you're planning on watching, because I know I will be. If you get a chance, Melissa, go to a sports bar and watch USA soccer. It's the best. So Sue-Ann and I did this last week, and it was a hoot and a holler. Get the jersey and go have fun. So anyway, go USA. Happy 250th birthday. And here's to staying curious and to keep on learning. And Melissa, you always tell our audience something at the end of our show. Yeah. Super important.
Yes. To celebrate the semi-centennial, please hit like and subscribe. Share this episode with a friend of yours that really is into history just like we are, or who wants to have engaging and interesting conversations that provoke thought. So hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
And remember, don't be that chunk of the people during the revolution who were like, I take it or leave it. I'm not really paying attention. Get involved in the conversation. Let's have some fun talking about it. You know how to do that. And we appreciate all of you. We appreciate you listening. And stay tuned for the next episode, which will be part 2 of American history.
See you next time.
Take care, everyone.